Second, you got to be able to survive a first strike. Well, we have the example of Clark Field. You'll notice that with hardening, we could go to silos, and if the silos became targeted with very, very accurate missiles eventually, and they thought about this being a probability, well, then you would go mobile. The Minuteman, which is this missile, was actually designed to be truck transportable so that you could make it mobile when and if the silos became vulnerable to an accurate strike. Now, we chose not to do that, but we understood that there could be limitations. Now, one of the questions I have is we've come up with new forms of concrete, make them super hard. I don't know what that buys you. My guess is if you're accurate enough, maybe not enough. But this is a bit of a race of technology, too. Then, of course, there was sea basing, which made it very hard to target in a first strike those weapons. This was the reason why that topic became such a hot one. Third hurdle, oh, I should get back to just one more comment about vulnerability. When the silos became roughly vulnerable to Russian heavy and reasonably accurate missiles, we started toying with a number of things before the end of the Cold War. One of them was to make things mobile with MX and Midgetman, and you can look up what those missiles were. I remember being on the Hill and being in the Senate Armed Services Committee staff rooms and listening to the debates, and of course, we didn't do it because the Cold War ended. Before the Cold War ended, though, there was another idea, which is, well, why don't you just base as many of these missiles as closely to one another as you can in what was called dense pack. And the thought there was that when the Soviet missile tried to take one of the weapons out, one of the silos out, it would throw up so much debris that the incoming additional missiles would suffer what was called fratricide. And that during that interim, you could then shoot straight out, and everything would be fine. You wouldn't need mobility. A lot of people who are critical of this said, no, that looks like a first strike option. So, you know, lots of debate. How do you feel today? Cold War ended, didn't have to do it. But I think the next thing is really interesting because I think it's something topical, still in play. One of the things that became popular is arguing that, well, we didn't have to worry about any of the vulnerability questions, really, because we could launch on warning or launch under attack. Now, I know all the people personally who pushed the argument for silo basing. I mean, some of them have died, but I worked for them. They would roll over in their grave hearing this. They say, what do you mean you want to rely on that? That's crazy. But in fact, it could be that that's exactly what we're relying on. I don't know. And this is something for people with their clearances to check out. I certainly have had conversations with people at the Defense Department where it was pretty clear that's what they were talking about. The problem with that in the minds of the oldsters was that why, you know, what if you launched under a warning and your warning was wrong? Boy, that'd be a bad day. And even launching under attack seemed a little unclear. You really wanted to know what the character of things were and, you know, whether it really was an attack. In any case, one way around vulnerability is to become more forward-leaning. This is really the only point. And that becomes a problem. There are two things that you want to optimize, and they're in tension when it comes to your basing of your nuclear forces. One is you do not want these things to be used when you do not want them to be used. You don't want unauthorized or accidental use of these things to precipitate disaster. On the other hand, you really want them to work when you want them to work, when you're being attacked. The problem is, when you optimize for one, it eats away at the attributes and your ability to do the other. Their intention. So for example, if you want to be sure that you can strike back, you would delegate authority and distribute your forces so that somebody always could pull the trigger. On the other hand, maybe you don't want somebody always able to pull the trigger, particularly if you don't know whether they're drinking heavily, yeah, or worse. On the other hand, if you concentrate authority in a location, well, you could be decapitated. Not good.